Imagine you're in Panama City on a warm December night in 1989. The air is heavy, the streets quieter than usual. Then, without warning, the sky flashes. A low rumble of aircraft turns into sudden explosions. Tracers streak across the darkness. Within minutes, it's clear. This isn't a drill. It's a full-scale invasion by one of the most powerful militaries in the world. That night, the United States launched Operation Just Cause. To understand how the world arrived at that moment, we have to go back years before the first shot was fired. Panama is a small country with an outsized importance, all because of a narrow stretch of land connecting two oceans. The Panama Canal, long controlled by the United States, is a vital route for global trade and a symbol of strategic power. Throughout the Cold War, Washington kept a strong presence in the Canal Zone, while Panamanian politics revolved around sovereignty, control, and who truly ran the country. In the 1970s, agreements were signed to gradually transfer full control of the canal to Panama by the end of 1999, raising hopes for a more balanced relationship. But inside Panama, the armed forces were growing in influence. A military officer named Manuel Noriega was quietly rising through the ranks. Trained in part by foreign intelligence services, he built powerful networks in the army, the police, and the secret services. By the early 1980s, even when someone else held the formal title of president, Noriega was the real power behind the government. For a time, he managed a careful balancing act. He cooperated with U.S. agencies on some regional matters, while maintaining his own authority at home. But as the decade wore on, information surfaced about internal repression and his alleged connections to illegal trafficking networks. In 1988, U.S. federal grand juries indicted him on drug-related charges. The relationship between Washington and Panama's military ruler deteriorated sharply. Sanctions were imposed, funds were frozen, and the tone of public statements hardened. Inside Panama, political tension was also rising. Opposition parties and civic groups called for free and fair elections. In May 1989, Panamanians went to the polls. Early results suggested that the opposition candidate, Guillermo Endara, had clearly won. Supporters celebrated in the streets, believing a peaceful change of government was finally at hand, but that hope didn't last. Noriega's allies annulled the election results, declared the vote invalid, and moved to keep him in power. Scenes of opposition leaders being harassed and beaten shocked many inside and outside the country. Around the same time, the United States increased its pressure. Economic measures tightened, and U.S. forces stationed in and around the Canal Zone began holding visible exercises. Skirmishes broke out between U.S. personnel and the Panama Defense Forces, OAPDF. In October 1989, an attempted coup by Panamanian officers failed, and the participants were harshly punished. This made it clear that internal opposition within the armed forces was being crushed. In December, the spiral of confrontation sped up. On December 15th, a Panamanian assembly loyal to Noriega declared that the country was in a state of war with the United States, a dramatic gesture that further raised the temperature. The very next day, a U.S. Marine lieutenant was shot and killed at a PDF roadblock. In a separate incident, other U.S. citizens were detained and mistreated. In Washington, these events were presented as proof that American lives were in serious danger. Behind closed doors, the final decisions were made. President George H.W. Bush and his advisors concluded that diplomacy and sanctions had failed to remove Noriega or restore the election results. They approved Operation Just Cause, giving the military a green light to act. The official goals were to protect U.S. citizens, defend democracy by installing the elected government, safeguard the canal's neutrality, and bring Noriega to face charges in U.S. courts. Shortly after midnight on December 20, 1989, the operation began. In the darkness over Panama, transport planes and helicopters approached their targets. Paratroopers jumped toward airfields and bases. Special operations forces moved against key sites like command centers, broadcasting facilities, and military headquarters. Simultaneous strikes hit the PDF's main installations, including the Comandancia in Panama City and airfields like Rio Hato. The idea was clear: move fast, strike many targets at once, and prevent Panamanian forces from organizing an effective response. On the ground, the experience was chaotic and intense. Residents in neighborhoods near military bases woke to the sound of explosions and gunfire. Some rushed to the floors of their apartments or huddled in interior rooms, unsure of what was happening. Despite pockets of heavy resistance, especially near the PDF headquarters, the balance of power was lopsided. The United States had brought roughly 27,000 troops, supported by modern aircraft and technology. The PDF was far smaller and less equipped. Within the first day, most of the main military objectives were reported captured or neutralized. On that same first day, a new political chapter was staged. Guillermo Endara, the opposition candidate whose election had been annulled, was sworn in as president. Symbolically, this happened on a U.S. military base, not in the traditional presidential palace. His supporters saw it as the moment the will of the voters was finally recognized. Critics argued it blurred the line between liberation and foreign control. Manuel Noriega, however, was not yet in custody. As the invasion unfolded, he slipped away, moving between safe houses, protected by loyal units. Special operations teams were sent to cut off his escape routes. In one mission, known as Nifty Package, Navy SEALs destroyed his personal jet and boat, making it harder for him to flee. With the main PDF positions collapsing, Noriega eventually sought refuge where he believed foreign troops would hesitate to enter: the Apostolic Nunciature, the diplomatic mission of the Holy See in Panama City. He arrived there on Christmas Eve, placing himself under religious protection but also surrounding himself with a besieging army just outside the gates. What followed was a psychological standoff. U.S. forces set up a cordon around the building. To increase pressure, they used loudspeakers to broadcast loud music and constant noise toward the compound. The scene was surreal: a small, walled diplomatic building containing a former military ruler, encircled by troops, while reporters from around the world turned the standoff into a global media spectacle. Elsewhere in Panama, the human cost of the invasion was becoming clear. In neighborhoods close to PDF positions, like Orillo, buildings were damaged or destroyed by fires, forcing families to flee with whatever they could carry. Residents later spoke of loved ones lost, homes gone, and the shock of seeing familiar streets turned into battle zones. Casualty estimates vary. Official U.S. figures listed 23 U.S. soldiers killed and several hundred Panamanian military and civilian deaths. Other organizations suggest the civilian toll could be much higher. International reactions were divided. Some governments supported the U.S. action, emphasizing the restoration of the elected Panamanian government. Others, including many countries in Latin America, condemned the invasion as a violation of Panama's sovereignty and international law. The United Nations General Assembly debated resolutions criticizing the use of force. Inside Panama, daily life began a slow return toward normality. Checkpoints remained and curfews were enforced, but markets started to reopen. The Panama Defense Forces were dismantled, and plans were made to create a new public security force under civilian authority. Back at the Apostolic Nunciature, the days dragged on. Negotiations continued behind closed doors. Finally, on January 3, 1990, the standoff ended. Manuel Noriega stepped out of the Nunciature and surrendered to U.S. authorities. He was flown to the United States to face charges. For Washington, this was the fulfillment of a key objective. With Noriega gone, the large-scale phase of Operation Just Cause officially ended. A follow-on mission, Operation Promote Liberty, began, focusing on stabilizing the country. For Panama, this was the start of a new, but not easy, chapter. Reconstruction, reconciliation, and investigations into what happened all lay ahead. In the United States, the invasion is often remembered as a short, decisive military success. Planners point to the rapid achievement of goals and the relatively low number of U.S. casualties. But in Panama, the memory is more complicated. For many, the invasion marked the end of military rule and the beginning of a more open political system. At the same time, families who lost loved ones and homes remember the human cost. The 1989 invasion raises enduring questions. When is it acceptable for one country to use force inside another? Who gets to decide? The debates that began in the wake of Operation Just Cause continue to echo today. The U.S. invasion of Panama is more than just a military campaign. It's the story of a small nation at the crossroads of global strategy, of a leader's rise and fall, and of ordinary people whose lives were changed in a single December night. It's a reminder that behind every operation, there are human stories of fear and relief, loss and new beginnings. Thanks for watching. If you found this story interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into historical events.